Eclipse of Reason by Max Horkheimer quotes, Eclipse of Reason by Max Horkheimer, first published in 1947, critically examines how modern society has transformed reason into a tool of control, detaching it from moral and philosophical foundations. Horkheimer explores the shift from objective reason, which traditionally sought universal truths and ethical guidance, to subjective or instrumental reason, which values efficiency and utility over meaningful ends. This transformation, he argues, has led to a crisis in which reason no longer questions or guides our goals, but merely serves them, often at the expense of human dignity, freedom, and ethical considerations. Throughout the text, Horkheimer critiques the reduction of reason to an instrument for achieving predefined objectives, influenced heavily by capitalist values and technological advances, revealing how this shift contributes to a dehumanizing, technocratic society that prioritizes power and control over genuine human welfare. Quote 1. When the ordinary man is asked to explain what is meant by the term reason, his reaction is almost always one of hesitation and embarrassment. This quote highlights the uncertainty people feel when defining abstract concepts like reason. The hesitation shows how deeply ingrained, yet unexplored, these ideas are in our everyday lives. Reason, here, is treated as something self-evident, but its true depth and complexity often elude common understanding. Quote 2. Reason has never really directed social reality, but now reason has been so thoroughly purged of any specific trend or preference that it has finally renounced even the task of passing judgment on man's actions and way of life. This emphasizes the transformation of reason from a guiding principle in society to a mere tool, devoid of ethical judgment. The passage critiques how reason has been stripped of its moral compass, leaving human actions and societal structures unchecked by rational, moral inquiry. Quote 3. As reason is subjectivized, it also becomes formalized. This statement reflects the evolution of reason from an objective force that guides human actions toward one that merely follows form. In its formalized state, reason loses its power to critically assess aims or ends, becoming instead a system that merely operates within existing structures without questioning them. Quote 4. The formalization of reason has far-reaching theoretical and practical implications. If the subjectivist view holds true, thinking cannot be of any help in determining the desirability of any goal in itself. Here, the author is arguing that once reason is reduced to a tool for achieving goals, rather than a way of understanding the worth of those goals, it becomes ineffective in moral and philosophical decision-making. This formalization leads to a detachment of reason from value-based judgments. Quote 5. In modern times, reason has displayed a tendency to dissolve its own objective content. This quote underscores the idea that reason, once seen as a way to understand universal truths, has been emptied of its deeper objective content. In modern society, reason no longer seeks to reveal truths, but instead focuses on technicalities and procedures. Quote 6. Having given up autonomy, reason has become an instrument. This statement critiques the modern view of reason as a mere tool used for achieving practical ends, rather than a force capable of determining what those ends should be. The loss of autonomy implies that reason no longer serves humanity's deeper intellectual and ethical needs, but is instead controlled by external forces like technology or economics. Quote 7. The more the concept of reason becomes emasculated, the more easily it lends itself to ideological manipulation and to the propagation of even the most blatant lies. This statement critiques the weakening of reason, suggesting that as reason loses its depth and authority, it becomes a tool for manipulation. Instead of guiding moral or ethical truth, reason is now easily used to justify any argument, even those that are blatantly false, making it a pliable instrument for ideology rather than a force for objective truth. Quote 8. Subjective reason conforms to anything. It lends itself as well to the uses of the adversaries as of the defenders of the traditional humanitarian values. This highlights the flexibility of subjective reason, showing that it can be used by anyone, regardless of their moral stance. This malleability makes it dangerous, as it can justify actions or beliefs that oppose humanitarian values, demonstrating how reason has been stripped of its guiding moral force and is now simply a tool for various interests. Quote 9. Philosophy is always wrong and instinct and common sense always right, because philosophy is unobservant and reasons from narrow and insufficient premises. Here, the speaker dismisses philosophy in favor of instinct and common sense, reflecting a distrust in intellectualism. This reveals a growing sentiment where philosophical reasoning is seen as detached from reality and practical. Immediate thinking is considered superior, further reflecting the degradation of reason into subjective practicality. Quote 10. Justice, equality, happiness, tolerance, all the concepts that, as mentioned, were in preceding centuries supposed to be inherent in or sanctioned by reason, have lost their intellectual roots. This quote reflects how fundamental human values, once deeply connected to reason, have now been severed from their philosophical foundations. Justice, equality, and similar ideals are still valued, but they no longer have a strong rational or intellectual basis, leaving them vulnerable to manipulation and losing their inherent connection to truth. Quote 11. Every philosophical, ethical, and political idea, its lifeline connecting it with its historical origins having been severed, has a tendency to become the nucleus of a new mythology. This emphasizes how, once ideas are disconnected from their original objective basis, they risk becoming mythological rather than rational. Philosophical and ethical concepts, when divorced from their historical and rational foundations, can devolve into irrational beliefs, much like myths, which lose their critical, guiding purpose. Quote 12. The reification is typical of the subjectivization and formalization of reason. It transforms works of art into cultural commodities, and their consumption into a series of haphazard emotions divorced from our real intentions and aspirations. This quote explains how the formalization of reason, which strips away deeper meaning, leads to the commodification of art. Art, instead of being a profound expression of truth or human experience, is turned into a mere product for consumption, generating surface-level emotional responses disconnected from any deeper engagement with the artwork's original intent or societal relevance. Quote 13. Luxuries are either adopted as necessities by the masses or regarded as a means of relaxation. Nothing, not even material well-being, which has allegedly replaced the salvation of the soul as man's highest goal, is valuable in and for itself. No aim as such is better than another. This quote highlights the shift in modern society, where luxuries and material goods, once seen as non-essential, are now normalized or justified as necessities. Material well-being has overtaken spiritual goals, and no objective measure of value exists, making all pursuits, whether materialistic or otherwise, equally valid in society's eyes, regardless of deeper worth. Quote 14. Modern thought has tried to make a philosophy out of this view, as represented in pragmatism. The core of this philosophy is the opinion that an idea, a concept, or a theory is nothing but a scheme or plan of action, and therefore truth is nothing but the successfulness of the idea. This quote reflects on the philosophy of pragmatism, where truth is reduced to whatever is practical or successful in application. It critiques how this view limits the concept of truth to outcomes rather than inherent validity, turning ideas into mere instruments for achieving goals, with their success determining their truth. Quote 15. Pragmatism reflects a society that has no time to remember and meditate. This brief but powerful quote captures how pragmatism mirrors a fast-paced, future-oriented society that is too busy for reflection or contemplation. It emphasizes the diminishing role of reflection in human thought, as pragmatism prioritizes action and immediate utility over deeper understanding and historical insight. Quote 16. Philosophy, by preserving the idea of objective truth under the name of the absolute, or in any other spiritualized form, achieved the relativization of subjectivity. This quote suggests that by holding on to the concept of objective truth, philosophy once managed to check subjectivity, offering a balance between individual perspective and universal truths. It reflects on how earlier philosophical systems kept subjectivity in check by upholding some form of objective or transcendent truth, unlike the subjectivist tendencies of modern thought. Quote 17. Today, there is almost general agreement that society has lost nothing by the decline of philosophical thinking, for a much more powerful instrument of knowledge has taken its place, namely, modern scientific thought. This quote reflects a prevailing attitude in contemporary society that devalues philosophical inquiry, believing it has been surpassed by the empirical rigor of scientific methods. The assertion suggests that science is seen as the superior form of understanding, dismissing philosophy's role in grappling with deeper existential or ethical questions, which is a crucial part of human intellectual history. Positive. Quote 18. Positivism is philosophical technocracy. It specifies as the prerequisite for membership in the councils of society an exclusive faith in mathematics. This statement critiques positivism by equating it to technocracy, where technical expertise, especially in mathematics, becomes the sole criterion for governing society. The quote implies a narrow vision of governance and knowledge, where the complexities of human life and ethical considerations are reduced to mathematical or scientific rationality, excluding broader philosophical reflections. Quote 19. The philosophies of the absolute are offered as an excellent instrument to save us from the chaos, sharing the fate of all the doctrines, good or bad, that pass the tests of present-day social mechanisms of selection. Objectivistic philosophies become standardized for specific uses. This quote illustrates how objective philosophies, once rich in meaning, are now being co-opted by modern society as standardized tools to impose order amid chaos. In doing so, these philosophies lose their depth and are transformed into mechanisms that serve subjective utilitarian purposes rather than addressing more profound truths about existence and morality. Quote 20. Neo-Thomism, like any other dogmatic philosophy, tries to stop thinking at a certain point, in order to create a preserve for some supreme being or value, be it political or religious. This critique of Neo-Thomism points to how it, like other dogmatic systems, places limits on critical thought by stopping inquiry at a predefined endpoint. This halting of philosophical exploration is seen as a means to uphold a fixed belief system, whether religious or political, preventing deeper intellectual engagement or evolution in thought. Quote 21. Science should expect philosophical thought, as put forward by either philosophers or scientists, to account for the nature of truth rather than simply to boost scientific methodology as the ultimate definition of truth. This quote emphasizes the need for philosophical inquiry to explore and define the nature of truth, rather than merely elevating scientific methodology as the ultimate source of truth. It suggests that reducing truth to what can be empirically verified or experimentally tested is an incomplete view, as philosophy offers a broader lens through which to understand and interrogate truth itself. Quote 22. The so-called practical world has no place for truth, and therefore splits it to conform it to its own image. The physical sciences are endowed with so-called objectivity, but emptied of human content. The humanities preserve the human content, but only as ideology, at the expense of truth. This quote critiques how modern society fragments truth to suit its purposes. The physical sciences are stripped of their human relevance, while the humanities, which retain humanistic concerns, become ideological and disconnected from objective truth. This reflects a loss of balance between human values and scientific rigor, leading to a distorted understanding of both. Quote 23. The positivists say, on the one hand, that science should speak for itself, and on the other, that science is a mere tool, and tools are inarticulate, however overwhelming their achievements. This quote exposes the contradiction in positivism, which simultaneously claims that science can speak authoritatively, while also treating it merely as an instrumental tool. It critiques the positivist view for not allowing science to express deeper meanings beyond its functionality, highlighting a limitation in how positivism values knowledge. Quote 24. Positivism abolishes the principles by which science and empiricism itself could possibly be justified. This statement suggests that by adhering strictly to empirical methods, positivism undermines the very principles that could justify its own methodology. It points to a fundamental flaw in positivist thinking, which dismisses philosophical reflection on the nature of science, leading to an incomplete understanding of truth. Quote 25. Both positivism and neo-Thomism are limited truths, ignoring the contradiction inherent in their principles. Consequently, both try to assume a despotic role in the realm of thought. This quote compares positivism and neo-Thomism, criticizing both for ignoring the contradictions within their frameworks. It argues that both systems, by claiming to offer comprehensive truths, end up being authoritarian in their approach to intellectual inquiry, limiting deeper critical thinking. Quote 26. The merit of positivism consists in having carried the fight of enlightenment against mythologies into the sacred realm of traditional logic. This quote acknowledges that positivism played an important role in challenging traditional dogmas and mythologies, extending the Enlightenment's critique into the realm of logic itself. However, it suggests that positivism has now become too rigid in its own principles, failing to move beyond its original purpose of debunking myths. Quote 27. The total transformation of each and every realm of being into a field of means leads to the liquidation of the subject who is supposed to use them. Here, Horkheimer argues that when everything in existence is reduced to a mere tool or means to an end, the individual who is meant to control and use these means loses their own sense of purpose. By transforming all things into utilitarian objects, even the subject, the thinking, autonomous individual, becomes hollow and loses their substance, ultimately becoming just another object within the system. Quote 28. Today, such ideologies are compromised and skipped over by progressive thought, which thus unwittingly facilitates the elevation of reality to the status of ideal. This quote discusses how modern thought, in its effort to be progressive, bypasses the critical evaluation of ideals. As a result, it inadvertently turns current reality into the ultimate ideal, elevating the status quo to a position where it is no longer questioned. This represents a critique of the failure of contemporary thought to challenge or transcend existing conditions. Quote 29. For the average man, self-preservation has become dependent upon the speed of his reflexes. Reason itself becomes identical with this adjustive faculty. Horkheimer explains that in modern society, reason is no longer about critical thinking or contemplation, but is reduced to the ability to quickly adapt and respond. Self-preservation is now tied to how well individuals can react to external pressures, turning reason into a mere tool for survival rather than a pathway to higher understanding or fulfillment. Quote 30. The history of man's efforts to subjugate nature is also the history of man's subjugation by man. This quote encapsulates Horkheimer's argument that humanity's drive to dominate nature mirrors its internal dynamics of domination and oppression among people. The way humans attempt to control and exploit the natural world reflects and reinforces structures of power and subjugation within human society itself. Quote 31. Each human being experiences the domineering aspect of civilization from his birth. To the child, the father's power seems overwhelming, supernatural in the literal sense of the word. This quote explains that from the very beginning of life, individuals are exposed to the overpowering forces of civilization, represented by the authority figures in their lives, such as parents. The father's authority is likened to a supernatural force, symbolizing the way in which society imposes its rules and disciplines on individuals, even in their formative years. This creates a deep tension between the natural instincts of the child and the expectations of civilized behavior. Quote 32. The human being, in the process of his emancipation, shares the fate of the rest of his world. Domination of nature involves domination of man. This quote emphasizes that humanity's attempt to control nature leads to its own subjugation. As humans seek freedom through the domination of the natural world, they also impose systems of control and repression on themselves and each other. This reflects the paradox that the more humans try to dominate their environment, the more they lose their own freedom, becoming subject to the same systems of power they use to control nature. Quote 33. The revolt of natural man, in the sense of the backward strata of the population, against the growth of rationality, has actually furthered the formalization of reason, and has served to fetter rather than to free nature. Here, Horkheimer discusses how what appears to be a rebellion against rationality and modern civilization often ends up reinforcing the very structures it opposes. Instead of leading to freedom, these revolts, especially by more marginalized groups, end up strengthening the systems of rational control, ultimately chaining nature further instead of liberating it. Quote 34. Civilization starts with, but must eventually transcend and transvaluate, man's native mimetic impulses. This quote highlights the development of civilization as a process that begins with humanity's instinctual, imitative behaviors, but must move beyond them. Civilization demands that humans learn to control their mimetic, or imitative, impulses, replacing them with rational behavior aimed at mastering the environment rather than simply reacting to it. Quote 35. The doctrines that exalt nature or primitivism at the expense of spirit do not favor reconciliation with nature. On the contrary, they emphasize coldness and blindness toward nature. In this passage, Horkheimer critiques romanticized views of nature and primitivism that, rather than leading to a harmonious relationship with nature, promote detachment and disregard. The failure to engage with nature in a meaningful, thoughtful way results in a lack of understanding and empathy, turning what should be a connection into a form of exploitation or neglect. Quote 36. The individual once conceived of reason exclusively as an instrument of the self. Now he experiences the reverse of this self-deification. The machine has dropped the driver. It is racing blindly into space. Horkheimer points out the reversal of the relationship between the individual and reason. Where once reason was seen as something that served the individual's needs and desires, now it has spiraled out of control, no longer serving the individual but acting independently, even destructively. This metaphor of a runaway machine illustrates how humanity has lost control of the very systems it created, leading to irrationality instead of progress. Quote 37. Individuality presupposes the voluntary sacrifice of immediate satisfaction for the sake of security, material, and spiritual maintenance of one's own existence. This statement highlights the foundation of true individuality, which requires self-discipline and the ability to forego instant gratification in order to ensure long-term stability and personal growth. Individuality, therefore, is not just about self-expression, but also about self-restraint and the cultivation of inner strength through thoughtful decisions that balance short-term desires with long-term needs. Quote 38. Liberalism may be said to have considered itself the sponsor of a utopia that had come true, needing little more than the smoothing out of a few troublesome wrinkles. This quote reflects on the optimism of liberalism, which viewed itself as having achieved a perfect system, with only minor issues to be fixed. Liberalism was seen as the realization of a societal ideal, where individual freedom and competition would naturally lead to harmony. However, this utopian vision ignores the deeper contradictions and inequalities that persisted, leading to the eventual disillusionment with the system. Quote 39. From the day of his birth, the individual is made to feel that there is only one way of getting along in this world, that of giving up his hope of ultimate self-realization. Horkheimer critiques the way modern society imposes conformity from the very start of life. Individuals are pressured to abandon any dreams of true self-fulfillment in favor of fitting into the existing social and economic systems. This loss of hope for personal growth and meaning is a central aspect of the decline of individuality, as people are forced to adapt to external demands rather than pursue their own paths. Quote 40. The crisis of reason is manifested in the crisis of the individual, as whose agency it has developed. The illusion that traditional philosophy has cherished about the individual and about reason, the illusion of their eternity, is being dispelled. This quote reveals that the decline of reason reflects the decline of the individual. Traditional philosophy, which viewed reason and individuality as timeless and eternal concepts, is now being challenged. Both are shown to be fleeting, leading to a broader crisis in modern thought and the role of the individual in society. Quote 41. The machine has dropped the driver. It is racing blindly into space. Here, Horkheimer uses the metaphor of a runaway machine to describe the state of reason and human control. What was once meant to be a tool serving the individual has spun out of control, no longer obeying human direction. This imagery illustrates how the systems humanity created are now operating without purpose or guidance, leading to irrationality. Quote 42. Workers today, no less than the rest of the population, are intellectually better trained, better informed, and much less naive. They know the details of national affairs and the chicanery of political movements, particularly of those that live by propaganda against corruption. Horkheimer points out that modern workers, unlike their predecessors, are highly informed about politics and national events. Despite this knowledge, they still remain entangled in systems of power that manipulate them. Their awareness of political corruption, while significant, does not translate into real change, as they are bound by the very structures they seek to critique. Quote 43. The deification of industrial activity knows no limits. Relaxation comes to be regarded as a kind of vice so far as it is not necessary to assure fitness for further activity. This quote critiques the modern glorification of productivity, where every moment not spent working is seen as wasteful. Rest and relaxation are no longer valued for their own sake, but are instead justified only if they serve the purpose of making one more productive. This reflects the industrial mindset that places efficiency and output above human well-being. Quote 44. The formalization of reason leads to a paradoxical cultural situation. On the one hand, the destructive antagonism of self and nature, an antagonism epitomizing the history of our civilization, reaches its peak in this era. In this quote, Horkheimer critiques how reason has been reduced to a tool that further intensifies the conflict between humans and nature. This antagonism, which has long characterized human civilization, has now reached its most extreme form, where reason is no longer a force for harmony, but one that deepens division and destruction. Quote 45. Philosophical thinking, whose task it is to essay a reconciliation, has come to deny or to forget the very existence of the antagonism. Horkheimer argues that philosophy, which should be seeking reconciliation between conflicting elements such as nature and the self, has instead neglected to address this fundamental divide. By ignoring this conflict, modern philosophy contributes to the problem rather than offering solutions, allowing the cultural tensions to worsen. Quote 46. Faith in philosophy means the refusal to permit fear to stunt in any way one's capacity to think. This quote expresses the belief that true philosophical thinking must overcome fear and not allow it to limit the scope of inquiry. In a time when individuals may feel overwhelmed or oppressed, the capacity to think freely and critically remains crucial to resisting both societal pressures and intellectual conformity. Quote 47. There is no definition of philosophy. Definition of it is identical with the explicit account of what it has to say. Horkheimer explains that philosophy cannot be strictly defined because its essence lies in what it seeks to express. Philosophy's nature is inextricable from its content and purpose, which is to engage with the complexities of human thought and existence. Any attempt to confine philosophy to a rigid definition would strip it of its broader, dynamic role. Quote 48. Each concept must be seen as a fragment of an inclusive truth, in which it finds its meaning. In this quote, Horkheimer emphasizes that individual concepts in philosophy are parts of a larger, interconnected truth. No single idea or concept stands alone. Each is a piece of a broader, more complex whole. Philosophical inquiry, therefore, is about exploring how these fragments fit together to reveal deeper truths. Quote 49. The disease of reason is that reason was born from man's urge to dominate nature, and the recovery depends on insight into the nature of the original disease, not on a cure of the latest symptoms. This quote highlights that reason, from its inception, has been rooted in humanity's desire to control nature. The problems reason faces today are not new, but stem from this original purpose. True recovery requires understanding this foundational issue rather than simply addressing surface-level problems. Quote 50. The subjugation of nature will revert to subjugation of man, and vice versa, as long as man does not understand his own reason and the basic process by which he has created and is maintaining the antagonism that is about to destroy him. Horkheimer points out that as humans continue to dominate nature, they also dominate themselves, perpetuating a cycle of oppression. Without comprehending how reason itself fuels this destructive process, humanity risks being undone by the very forces it has set in motion. Quote 51. The idea of the dignity of man is born from the experience of barbarian forms of domination. This quote explains that the concept of human dignity emerged in reaction to the oppressive systems that dehumanized people. It suggests that values like dignity, often seen as inherent, are historically linked to past experiences of subjugation, and this legacy still shapes modern ideas of humanity. Quote 52. Negation plays a crucial role in philosophy. The negation is double-edged, a negation of the absolute claims of prevailing ideology and of the brash claims of reality. Here, Horkheimer stresses the importance of negation in philosophical thought. Negation challenges both the dominant ideologies and the superficial acceptance of reality, allowing philosophy to critically evaluate and go beyond existing structures without settling for false absolutes. Quote 53. The method of negation, the denunciation of everything that mutilates mankind and impedes its free development, rests on confidence in man. This quote highlights that negation, as a philosophical tool, aims to dismantle systems and ideas that harm humanity and prevent its growth. It is based on a fundamental belief in human potential and the possibility of progress, contrasting with philosophies that passively accept current conditions. In Eclipse of Reason, Max Horkheimer emphasizes that the erosion of objective reason has grave consequences for both individual autonomy and social justice. By reducing reason to a function of technical and administrative utility, modern society risks reinforcing oppressive structures and undermining the very essence of human freedom. Horkheimer's analysis highlights the urgent need to reclaim a form of reason that is not bound to mere functionality, but is critically engaged with ethical and existential questions. He calls for a philosophy that resists the commodification of thought, encouraging a renewed commitment to reason as a means of understanding and challenging the social conditions that shape human lives. Ultimately, Eclipse of Reason serves as a powerful critique of contemporary rationality, urging a return to a more holistic and human-centered approach to knowledge and ethics.
Curious to dive into the mind of Max Horkheimer? With StudyLab Pro's Book GPT, it's possible. Ask questions, explore themes, and discover the depths of Eclipse of Reason in an entirely new way. Start your conversation now by clicking on our logo. And if you're hungry for more educational content, subscribe to our channel to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Want more than just videos? Click on our logo now to join us on our platform for multiple choice tests, in-depth content, and tools to help you ace your studies. Get started now.